Committee meeting. E te kaupapa e whāki nei is the item 10, the annual update on delivery of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, Auckland's Climate Plan 2021, another big bit of work that is happening at Auckland Council. So I would now like to just a bit of check that everybody is here, and Suad, you're with us?
I am too. Can we just do a quick roll call, Chair?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Suad, for that reminder. Over to you.
Thank you. Councillor Hills, I see you. Councillor Bartley, see you. Councillor Casey, yep.
Kia ora, Suad.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Here, finally got the sound figured out.
Yay.
Hey. Councillor Collins, I think he's an apology, he will be late. Councillor Coombe is present. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dalton, I see you. Councillor Darby. Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher, I see you too. Mayor Goff.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson. IMSB member Glenn Wilcox. I saw he's present. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Newman, present.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
I'm here, Suad. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Konbanwa.
Councillor Young.
Kia ora, present.
Kia ora, Member Wilson.
Aye, Suad.
Thank you. Over to you, Papa Coombe.
Kia ora, Suad. So I'm now going to invite Matthew, who is leading this kaupapa, is going to be presenting and I think sharing his screen. We'll let that happen. We'll have the presentation. It's coming up. There we go. Thank you. Kia ora, Matthew, and perhaps you can introduce who is supporting this item with you.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. So today I will be presenting with Lauren Simpson, Principal Sustainability and Resilience Advisor within the Chief Sustainability Office. We're here today to present an annual update on the delivery of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, Auckland's climate plan. And before we start, it is worth noting that the Chief Sustainability Office is presenting today's update, but many of the actions in Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri are owned and delivered by teams across Auckland Council and CCOs, and also external partners and stakeholders. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the staff that have provided information and input into the progress report, and also the Chief Sustainability Office team and the Strategic Advice Unit for pulling together the progress report. You will have received a committee report. The progress report itself is an attachment to the committee report, and there is also a one-page summary attached to the committee report. So today's presentation will be providing a high-level overview of the progress report, including a summary of progress on actions and what is planned next. So a very brief overview of the journey to date in terms of how we've got to this point. So I won't go into too much detail here, but in 2015, Auckland Council joined the C40 Cities group, joining a group of cities committed to bold climate action. In 2018, climate change was one of the key in the Auckland Plan 20. In 2019, Auckland Council declared a climate emergency. In 2020, the emergency budget outlined foundational initiatives to address climate action and climate change, in addition to funding to decarbonise our own organisational emissions, such as transferring from gas boilers to electric boilers in our aquatic centres and decarbonising our fleet. Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, Auckland's climate plan was adopted last year and sets two key goals in terms of reducing regional emissions by 50% by 2030, transitioning to net zero emissions by 2050, and taking a precautionary approach to planning for climate change. Last year, for the first time, a climate action budget was included in the 10-year budget. A climate action package was included in the 10-year budget of 152 million. You'll all be very familiar with that. The RLTP, the Regional Land Transport Plan, was adopted last year, and you will have heard much during the last item around the development of the Transport Emissions Reduction Plan and the great work that is underway there. We have had a significant update this year from central government following the Climate Change Commission's final advice to government. Central government has released its draft emissions reduction plan discussion document. So this really outlines the direction that central government is intending to take in terms of meeting emissions reduction targets and decarbonising Aotearoa. That takes us to where we are today, December 2021, where we're presenting a progress report to you. And we'll come on to that more shortly. So the progress report you see there is the attachment and also the A3 summary that is attached to this committee report, both of which will be available on climateakl.co.nz, the Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri climate plan website in due course. In terms of the progress report itself, this is the first progress report since the launch of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri back in December 2020, so a year on. It essentially focuses on a number of key elements. So it evaluates progress, summarises our successes and challenges, and outlines our future focus. In terms of future reporting, we're proposing that in future we come back to the committee around September. So in September of next year, starting from next year, to align with other key reports. So looking to come back to you in September to align with annual reporting on the Auckland plan, the Māori Outcomes Framework, and the long-term plan. This will also give us the opportunity on a 3-yearly basis to provide a deep dive of the progress against Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri and align this with advice provided ahead of the LTP planning process so that we can provide integrated advice, including Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, the Auckland Plan, Māori Outcomes, and annual reports. So looking to bring that together as a package. One of the key elements of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri is outlining a partnerships and governance approach, and I wanted to touch on this briefly. This was brought to the Environment and Climate Change Committee of September last year. In terms of the key elements here, you will see there Mana Whenua, there is a need for further engagement with Mana Whenua to discuss partnership and governance and the delivery of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, and I'll be speaking more to that later in the presentation. The Climate Political Reference Group has been formed and meets every 3 months to provide guidance, feedback and direction on Council's climate action. Comprises of 6 councillors, including the chair and deputy chair of this committee, 6 local board members and 2 IMSB members. A regional leadership group is planned and is planned for establishment in 2022, and we will be recruiting key positions to support the establishment and delivery of that regional leadership group. That's a very key element of our approach in terms of how we accelerate climate action and leverage further change through regional partnerships. Looking at membership consisting of the Auckland Council family, Mana Whenua, central government, business, community, DHBs and youth to really look at cross-sectoral partnerships and climate action for the region. And also looking to establish a rangatahi Ropu next year. In terms of the monitoring and reporting framework that we are presenting to you and proposing is taken forward for future years, you will note here that the Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri sets some high-level targets. So from an emissions reduction perspective, it sets the target of a 50% emissions reduction by 2030 against a 2016 baseline, transitioning to net zero emissions by 2050. And that's in line with the central government approach too, in terms of net zero emissions by 2050. Adaptation targets are in development, and we will be touching on that later as well. Lauren, who is on the call, has been doing some excellent work leading that for the Chief Sustainability Office. In terms of the priorities within Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, there are 8 priorities, and we are monitoring and reporting progress against those 8 priorities. with the exception of Te Pua Waitanga o Te Tātai. The reason for this is that Te Pua Waitanga o Te Tātai is a principles-based priority that outlines Te Ao Māori principles to embed within the other priorities and weave throughout the priorities. So looking at principles such as kaitiakitanga, manakitanga, rangatiratanga, it's not possible to assign progress against those in the same way as a specific action, but it's clearly a focus that we need to address through the delivery of the plan. In terms of the level of reporting, there's 3 levels of reporting that we are reporting against. So at the bottom there, you'll see the cross-cutting indicators. So this is emissions by sector, net emissions, and gross emissions. So gross emissions being our total emissions, net emissions being the emissions minus carbon sequestration, such as forestry. We're looking at progress indicators, of which there's 2 levels. So there's the headline indicators, which are the key elements of each priority that we're reporting against, and we'll come on to that later. And then a number of additional indicators, which we'll be reporting against every 3 years. So that's the deep dive I mentioned earlier. One of the key things to note about progress indicators is that many of the indicators don't change significantly on a yearly basis. So monitoring on a 3-yearly basis makes more sense. In terms of the priorities themselves, you will see the numbers identifying the number of action areas within a priority. And then in brackets there are the number of actions, which are the deliverable actions that we are monitoring progress against. So for example, natural environment has 5 action areas and 25 actions. Come on to that further shortly. In terms of progress against the actions, we have reached out and gained information and input to understand the progress against actions. So there's a total of 58 action areas and 179 actions in Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri. Important to note that Auckland Council has different levels of responsibility and control for these actions, reflecting the regional focus of the plan. So this isn't just a plan for Auckland Council or indeed Auckland Council and CCOs, it's about regional stakeholders as well and central government. Auckland Council has direct control of 111 actions, partial control of 30 actions. So that might be actions where, for example, we provide co-funding or where we have an agreement with central government, and an influencing role for 32 actions. So that's where we can influence, either influencing central government through advocacy, influencing industry, and so clearly there's a difference there between the level of responsibility. 6 actions within Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri are directly Māori-led. 33% of the actions in the plan are considered to be on track, with 67% either partially underway or not in progress. So 39% are partially underway and 28% are not in progress. And in terms of the last category there, so partially underway, there's a few things to consider here. Many of the actions have a long delivery time frame. Many of the actions aren't anticipated to be delivered in year 1, certainly, or even the first few years or 5 years. They take a longer time, especially some of the adaptation actions, which is around preparing for the impacts of climate change. One of the things to note is that we looked at the feedback we received to try and understand better why 28% of actions are not in progress. A few things to provide comments on here. So there's a blend of actions that are not in progress. Some are Auckland Council's under Auckland Council's direct control, some we have influence over, some are partial control. So there's a real blend there in terms of ownership. In terms of some of the feedback that was provided in terms of not in progress, one of the common reasons was resource constraints, either staff resource to deliver on an action or where a specific area is waiting on recruitment, reflecting the currently constrained competitive recruitment market. There's also a number of actions that require additional technical resource, and that was stated as a reason. Some of the actions not in progress are waiting on further analysis and assessment. So, for example, a specific climate change risk assessment in order to commence with an approach to reducing the risk of facing infrastructure. You'll note there energy and industry at the bottom is the priority with the most significant number of actions not in progress. One of the reasons for that is the priority lead, who was doing a great job evaluating and mapping out those actions and stakeholders, departed council at the start of the year and hasn't yet been replaced, unfortunately. So there is a gap there, but that's certainly something we need to pick up next year. And also recognising that a number of the energy and industry actions are not within the direct control of Auckland Council. In terms of the progress indicators themselves, so the cross-cutting indicators relating to emissions across the plan or across the region and across sectors. So we have the target of a 50% emissions reduction by 2030. So our targets relating to emissions are clear. From an adaptation perspective, we are developing targets. We're developing additional levels of detail relating to our adaptation targets, our actions and targets, and the development of climate change adaptation targets and also a monitoring system that goes with that is ongoing. There's been a significant amount of work this year with extensive engagement across Auckland Council, with council-controlled organisations and also with district health boards. We presented that work to C40 in terms of our progress on that and received very positive feedback in terms of the work that we're doing. One of the things to note, and this was raised in the previous presentation on the TERP, is that the latest emissions data we have, which is 2018, recognising that there is a lag in us receiving all the information we need to develop an emissions profile and then also to process it. So 2018 is the latest data. There was a 2.5% increase in gross emissions between 2016 and 2018. So that's something we do need to take into consideration in terms of the trend, and that is a trend that has continued from before 2016. We plan to bring the next update to you in September, assuming that it is released by then. So the 2019 update should be included next year, which should give us further information around the regional trend. And then obviously for 2020, 2021, the emissions profile for the region will be unusual due to COVID lockdowns, and we'll need to do some further analysis there. But there are also key elements of our emissions profile, such as fuel sales, that are key determinants that we can consider on a more up-to-date basis. In terms of the progress indicators that I mentioned, the headline indicators, so the two indicators per priority, are identified here in terms of those priorities and those indicators and what is measured. So we will be measuring these and reporting on these on an annual basis. This is the first year we're presenting this information, so we don't have a trend to present to you today, but we will be presenting an update in September in terms of how things have moved since this information was compiled. And obviously there will need to be some additional caveats to that in terms of the impacts of lockdown and so forth. One of the things to note is that the indicators on the right hand side for energy and industry are slightly different in that they do measure a percentage increase. So rather than being a specific number, they measure a percentage increase. So you can see there between 2016 and 2018, there was a 13.7% increase in emissions from electricity consumption and a 5.3% decrease in emissions from stationary fuel combustion. It's been said before today, but one of the key messages that needs to be reiterated and one of the key conclusions from the progress report and the work we've been doing to date more broadly is that despite the progress that is being made, and there is significant progress being made on climate action, Auckland's emissions are not remotely tracking in line with the target to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. As you've heard just before the lunch break, work on the Transport Emissions Reduction Plan, the TERP, shows the stark reality of the scale of the challenge and the level of intervention required. The TERP is certainly bringing that into sharp focus. It's not a surprise. We knew there was a significant change and we knew that bold and transformational change would be required across all sectors of the economy and society. That is stated in Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri. But what the Transport Emissions Reduction Plan is doing very well is bringing that into sharp focus from an intervention perspective, looking at the interventions that would be required. So those 2 points there relate to paragraphs 6 and 7 in the committee report and are outlined there for you. The last slide here is just a summary of what's next. and I wanted to just briefly talk through what we are planning next year and obviously beyond next year. So one of the key things is our engagement with Mana Whenua. There needs to be more engagement with Mana Whenua, and we need to build on the partnership that was created through the development of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri. The development of that partnership was central to the creation of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, and very much at a governance level, at a planning level, bringing together the work of Auckland Council and bringing together a Te Ao Māori perspective to understand how we approach climate action for the region. There's now a need to work further with Mana Whenua to discuss how we transition to partnership and governance of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri, and also importantly the way in which Mana Whenua can provide guidance and inform the development of climate action projects and the delivery of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri. So moving from the writing, the production of the climate plan into the delivery, and more work needs to be done there. A regional leadership group will be established towards the start of the next year to accelerate the implementation of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri through cross-sectoral partnerships and climate action. I feel very strongly that partnerships are central to the change that needs to occur. We are only going to achieve significant, bold climate action through successful partnerships. So this needs to be a focus next year, and we are recruiting specialist roles to take that on. The Transport Emissions Reduction Plan, as you've heard much about this morning, is a critical part of the transition that needs to occur to meet our emissions reduction goals, and a recommended decarbonisation pathway will be presented next year. We're developing a climate impact assessment tool to better inform council decision making around climate change. So very much looking at the start of decision making to provide decision makers with better informed with more information to make better informed decisions. Climate change adaptation targets will be completed next year. A climate innovation hub will be established, so that's being led by Auckland Unlimited, funded through the LTP, to activate climate innovation through collaboration and partnerships across sectors to address Auckland's biggest emissions and resilience challenges. A rangatahi program will be established, and we are recruiting for that now to bring rangatahi into Auckland Council to develop a program that is led by rangatahi for rangatahi, to engage with rangatahi and develop rangatahi climate action projects. There's a significant program funded through the LTP around enabling Aucklanders to support communities to engage further in climate action through community climate action funds, community climate action activator networks, online engagement tools, and an energy hardship project looking at addressing energy efficiency in homes that need intervention most to support those households suffering from energy hardship. Kia ora Te Tātai is a program, a Māori-led program that's looking at strengthening Māori and Kura functions to promote community resilience. And we are also taking action to reduce our own organisational emissions in terms of Auckland Council and Auckland Unlimited, addressing energy efficiency, energy demand within our existing facilities to reduce the impact that we have as an organisation, and also looking at procurement as a key element in which we can drive broader outcomes across the region through leveraging the role and scale of Auckland Council in procurement. That is my last slide. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ngā mihi kia koe, mo tō kōrero Matthew. Thank you so much for that presentation. I just wondered if before we go to Pātai, that we just bring up the resolution, the recommendations. If we can do that, please, Suad. Just so that we can see what is proposed. So just in terms of the B, that is just a new D. So that hasn't been deleted, it's still there. And then there's just two noting points which are taken from the report. And Matthew covered that in his presentation. So just noting that because it's covered in the report, but just not in the agenda report rather than in the progress report. So just important to highlight that. So just get a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Hills. Okay, I will move in. Councillor Hills was second. So we just get that on the table so everyone can see it. It's also been circulated, so if we have questions that are on the presentation, we can go back to that. Right, I am just looking in the sidebar and I can just see Pātai Tuatahi member Wilson. Kia ora, Karen. Oh, no, yeah, this is Pātai, yeah.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Apologies for my very bad spelling mistake, and I'm going to blame the fact that there's not enough ventilation in this room here. So I have a series, 1, 2, 3, 4 questions that I'm wanting to ask you, Matthew, if that's okay. So thank you for the presentation. Crikey, such a lot of work. And you haven't got a strong team present there to answer all the questions. Look, I looked at slide 4 of your presentation as you put it up there, and it was talking about te puawaitanga or te tātai as being there, but not there in the sense that it's a principles-based priority. And then I see as you move into the progress indicators, it doesn't appear at all. So we start with 8 of those, including te puawaitanga, and then we end up them not being evident. So I'll do one at a time because I might get myself all wrapped up in one question when it's actually 6. So I'm wondering where that sits, please, Matthew.
Yes, thank you, Mel Wilson. Thank you for that question. This is an issue that we had much discussion about regarding how we report progress against Te Puawaitanga or Te Tātai. So Te Puawaitanga or Te Tātai is a different format to the other priorities. The other priorities outline a number of actions which are specific in terms of what they're setting out to deliver. Te Puawaitanga or Te Tātai outlines 7 principles in terms of Te Ao Māori principles that should be considered and embedded throughout our approach to climate action. So when we considered how we could evaluate progress against that, it wasn't the case that it was a specific deliverable such as, if I take an obvious example, the electrification of Auckland's bus fleet. Are we on track? Partially, is it partially underway or not started? So we needed to think about how we address that from a reporting perspective, and the conclusion we landed on was that it's not possible, based on the way that the priority is set out, to measure whether it's completed, on track, partially underway, or not started. It certainly is central to our thinking around how we address that, and in the progress report we've identified Te Puawaitanga or Te Tātai as one of the priorities in terms of the highlights and challenges. So there's a number of projects we've identified that have embedded the principles of Te Puawaitanga or Te Tātai in a positive way. So we have covered it in the written summary, but just not in terms of the indicators. I would, if there is a suggestion from the IMSB around how we can do that better in future, we'd be very keen to discuss that with you, because as I said, we had a lot of discussion around that.
Thank you, Matthew. That would be appreciated, because it literally disappears, and then when it reappears, it's hard to track where it's sitting, and therefore how it is one of the original 7 or 8 that it was. So I found it quite difficult to try and track in terms of accountability, which is significant for us as IMSB. I found it difficult to track where that was going, and it also came under the heading of governance. I found that also hard to track. So if there's some assistance required, then absolutely, we as IMSB would be looking to aid and support that knowledge and understanding. So my second question is around what's described in one of the slide 6, I think it was, around 6 actions that were Māori led, and I wasn't clear, given we didn't have, there was no mention of Te Pua Waitanga except in slide 4. I wasn't sure how you could have those actions as Māori led when we didn't have the reaffirming of them.
So through the chair, the reference to the 6 actions that are Māori led is distinct from the Te Pua Waitanga or Te Tātai principles. As an example, actions that are Māori led are, for example, the projects that are under the Kia Ora Te Tātai program in terms of Māori led projects to support marae and kura to become more resilient, to become centres of community resilience, and also the rangatahi program in terms of a Māori-led rangatahi program. So that's what the reference to Māori-led actions refers to. So it's distinct from Te Pua Waitanga or Te Tātai.
Thank you. I've got 2 more, Madam Chair, and then I'll be really quick and move on. So I guess I'm just saying, in trying to follow how this rolls out in terms of the ability to look across and see the progress indicators, we actually have to identify those. So those 6 actions Māori led, if they come under this particular piece of work, then we need to know where they sit other than they're Māori led. So are they specifically around climate change, or are they to do with Te Pua Waitanga or Te Tātai? I'll leave that question there with you to think on. There was a blend of actions that you talked about that were not in progress, and I wasn't sure whether there was a component there that had a Māori view lens that would aid to my understanding. Is that a question to be asked, Matthew, or not?
Yes, certainly. So we have done some further analysis to identify those actions that are not in progress against each priority, the spread in terms of a control and accountability of those actions. I can confirm that some of those actions are Māori led, and unfortunately I can't pull that up now because I'm sharing my screen, but we can certainly have a conversation with IMSB, and we'd welcome that if that would be useful around that further breakdown. And just to note that one of the reasons that some of the actions are not in progress is it's a timing issue. Not all actions were intended to be started in year 1, so that may well be the case for the Māori-led actions as well. We'd need to look at that further.
Okay, lucky last. Matthew, thank you for your responses to date. You talked about the further engagement. It's probably got the most significant piece of work, which is about the partnership. And it seems to be further engagement that's left towards the back end, which is always a lot harder to pull through or pull to the top, if I can describe it in that manner. So I'm just wondering your thinking around where, when and where and with whom that piece of work, which is fairly significant because you've got acknowledgement in your MIS that that is a significant piece of work for mana whenua and hasn't necessarily been talked to throughout this report. Can you advise me on that?
Yes, if I've understood your question correctly, the situation we are currently presenting is that the development of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri was, there was a very strong partnership with the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum. The plan was presented with members of the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum for endorsement by this committee. That is focused on the governance and the development of the plan. There's now a strong need to progress that further through further engagement with Mana Whenua to understand how Mana Whenua wish to proceed in terms of guiding the development of climate action projects and also being more involved in the delivery of Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri. So moving from a governance function through the Kaitiaki Forum to more of a delivery function. And conversations we've had this year through Hui and Wānanga is specifically focused on that. So one of the projects that we have in progress and needs to be a strong focus for next year is how we develop a proposal with Mana Whenua for identifying a regular hui potentially to discuss the delivery and development of climate action projects, recognizing that that may require different members of the Mana Whenua Forum. It may be more focused on delivery than governance. So that's something we've had discussions about this year. There is more work that needs to be done, and it's top of mind for me and the team in terms of how we do that effectively. One of the members of staff that we are recruiting is a Māori Outcomes Lead for the Chief Sustainability Office, recognizing that that will certainly support our engagement with Mana Whenua and provide us with additional resource, but also recognizing that it's a role for everyone in the team to be working on that and working on our engagement with Mana Whenua. So in summary, it's very clear to me that this is something that needs to be a priority next year. We need to understand how we work with Mana Whenua to take forward the partnership and the good work that was established through Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri and build on that further.
Thank you, Matthew. I heard Mana Whenua engagement, priority and governance, so that suits me down to the ground. I appreciate your responses.
Ngā mihi, Member Wilson, and thank you as always, for your probing questions and pushing us in the right direction, and thank you for your offer to follow up with the team for next year. I just have one final pārtai on this from Councillor Darby. Kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora, Pippa. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Matthew, just can you just give us an account of how, we've got this environment targeted rate funding for urban ngāhere and other things, and now we're signalling a further targeted rate which is signalling includes more urban ngāhere planting. How are we tying in and tapping in to some of the MPI programs like their Hill Country Erosion Program, and they've got I think it's a Matariki Tūrako Memorial Tree Planting Program, and then they've got their 1 billion trees program, lots of money sloshing around there. How much of that did we grab to add to, the targeted rate money?
So in terms of the through the chair, in terms of the targeted rate money for the urban ngāhere, of which part of the climate action targeted rate proposal is for funding the urban ngāhere, so planting trees in areas that need them most, so areas most vulnerable to extreme heat and with lowest canopy cover. So that is a standalone fund in terms of the additional funding that's looking to be secured through the climate action targeted rate to invest in the ngāhere. That would be in addition to the initiatives that you've identified, and certainly we've been considering those initiatives, so the Mayor's 1 Million Trees Programme, for example, and the focus of the planting there. So this would be in addition to that. One of the tasks that we're currently considering is what is the opportunity for delivering ngāhere program in partnership, so looking at potential opportunities for co-funding, match funding, looking at opportunities for leveraging further value through that investment. So in terms of the examples you've given, they do not directly input into the budget that's assigned in the climate action targeted rate, but we are mindful of the other programs relating to tree planting and how this is an additional benefit to those.
Okay, look, I understand that. So is there another part of council that is taking advantage of all this other money? Because there seems to be a lot of it there.
Chair,
I just want to make sure that.
Sorry, did you?
I need to make.
I just had Did you have a point of order, Councillor Hills?
Sorry. In no way it was definitely not a point of order, but it's Rachel Callagher's team that have been working on that, and unfortunately, being Auckland, as Auckland always is, we have applied and tried to get into many of those funds. The Jobs for Nature, I think there was a memo that went out. We have only received small parts of that funding and worked with them on things like the Kaipara Moana, Chris, and I think we got about between 1.5 and 2 million to help with the Kauri dieback tracks and the Jobs for Nature. There are some small planting programs from the government, but a lot of it actually, they have looked at what we're doing with the natural environment targeted rate and said, oh, they're already doing it, we don't need to fund them, which our staff have been pushing back on, because we do believe that we should be getting equitable spend, as well. So we are trying, but Rachel could probably give you an update on that in more detail, but they have been trying to apply for every big government spend, and we mostly don't get a lot of it.
Okay, well, it's good to hear that we're doing that. The second question, Chair, is I'm aware that we've, even before the tree planting program that was brought about by the environment targeted rate, we were planting trees, but we weren't monitoring. So what is the change, Matthew, in the monitoring and reporting program of the tree planting programs? Are we coming back, season after season to check whether what we planted is still in the ground and growing?
Through the chair, so I can certainly answer this question to the best of my knowledge, and perhaps following today's meeting, I can also ask members of our Urban Ngāhere team to provide further clarification. One element that I am aware of is our tree app that we now have in place that allows contractors who visit a tree, to plant a tree or to maintain a tree, to record details about that tree. And we're collecting a database of trees that we have planted across the region, identifying the status of those trees and identifying whenever a tree is checked, maintained, what condition that tree is in. So that's a database that's growing over time. And that's been something that's been brought online in recent years to improve that understanding and monitoring of trees.
Yeah, Chair, I'll leave it there for now, but I'm stressing I'd like to see what monitoring program we have for this massive investment that we're undertaking. And I appreciate what Matthew's saying about an app, but we have lost literally thousands of trees in the past because we plant them and we walk away.
Yeah.
And we can't afford to continue that form.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Darby. Point made, and I think we can put that on as an action to follow up next year in terms of something that could be brought back to a committee workshop, perhaps. Did you have something to add, Matthew?
If I can just add one more point to that, thank you. Just to confirm, part of the climate action targeted rate proposal is obviously the planting of trees, and then also 3 years of maintenance built into that cost and included in the budget. So that's maintenance and watering of those trees to improve the success rate and increase the chance of successful establishment, just to confirm that point. But I will speak to the Urban Ngāhere team, the community facilities team, and look to pull together information relating to that for you.
And that was the same on the 11,000 mature street tree fund as well. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. We will humour you, Councillor Hills, but not to be encouraged answering partai. So I do just have a final question from, and just checking this is the final partai this time, Councillor Walker. And can it just be a question,
Sure.
please?
So I've got a question that takes Councillor Darby's question a step further, and it's around the proposed street planning. As I understand it, we do not have an adequate evaluation of what street trees are required, particularly for, trees for street tree planting. I'm mindful that other cities have updated their situation around this to future-proof planning for climate change, and certainly the City of Melbourne has done that. Following up on Chris Darby's question, my personal observation is that many native trees that have been planted are unsuited to street tree planting, and the failure rate is high. As much and all as I'm very supportive of native trees, they're geared to a forest landscape, and often their ability to cope in the harsh urban settings is really problematic. So I've got a question around, one, what advice we're working off. Secondly, two, is it tested? Three, where we're at in terms of the stock of appropriate trees that are available, bearing in mind that it takes probably 2 to 3 years to have the stock that's available for the type of tree, for the size that we are putting forward here.
Point of order,
then,
Madam Chair.
in addition to that,
I'll put it in the sidebar. But no
sorry, Councillor Walker, I've just got a point of order.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Just to point to relevancy, given that we're speaking to strategy staff who aren't the operational people that look after trees, and I just wondered whether this isn't the right place for those questions. It's not relevant to what we're talking about.
If it's not the right place...
Sorry, Madam Chair, can you please rule rather than Councillor answering that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Walker, I think you've made your point around the question, and also we've had that response already on the trees, and this is something that's going to be looked at and brought back to us with more information. So unless Matthew has anything that in terms of the climate plan that you can add, then...
The other question that I had, Madam Chair, was around the urgency of the carbon measurement tool to evaluate propositions. And
okay.
I think that is urgent because there are alternative propositions that people are coming forward with that are better than our propositions in terms of delivering faster, more, and more economically around mitigation. Thank you. So I'd invite a response around that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Matthew, can I ask you for a response?
Through the chair, thank you for that question, Councillor Walker. So in terms of the urgency of the carbon measurement tool, the climate impact assessment tool, I agree, it's urgent. It is an important tool for us to better understand the impacts of our decision making in terms of both emissions and also exposure to climate risk, which is the focus of the tool. We are working on that tool and co-developing it with a consultancy to gain further expert input, and we are looking to finalise that tool in Q1 of next year. So the first quarter of next year is when we are looking to finalise that tool, and we will be looking to finalise that as soon as possible, recognising the importance of it.
Kia ora. Thank you for that update. We're going to wrap up questions now. And in terms of comments, I would just like to make an introductory comment in terms of moving this, just to quickly highlight and recommending this to members, to add my thanks to the team, Matthew, and everybody who's involved in all of the work across the whole and council whānau. Te Tāruke-ā-Tāwhiri isn't council's plan, it's Auckland's climate plan, and so there's lots of different strands of work going on. So it's good to have this annual update, but I think for me it really is just summed up what I would like to say in terms of just noting that despite the progress being made, as shown in the progress report, Auckland's emissions are not remotely tracking in line with the target to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. And we, of course, had that very good debate on the TERP, and that's has shown us, with 100 months to go, the stark reality of the scale of the challenge and the level of intervention required, that more work and investment will be required. So I think I can just leave it there in terms of my comments. So in terms of my support for receiving this report and noting those items, and just noting what will happen with future publications of the report. Just like to hand over to Councillor Hills. Would you like to make any comment before I put this? Well, I see I also have a comment from Councillor Walker.
No, just thank you so much for the team. I know it has been extremely difficult with COVID now for 2 years. Many staff leaving. I know that with Matthew's been doing recruitment and 1 million submissions, as well as this and the TERP and support for the climate rate, as well as trying to roll out the initiatives that were approved just 6 months ago with the 10-year budget, and then we went straight into lockdown not long after. So I just think that it's good to see progress. It's amazing to see how far we've actually come since we declared a climate emergency in 2019. We just need to get more action, and it shows that that's happening, but we need to be leaders and make sure that we are showing Auckland that we as a council and our CCOs are talking the talk, and we are seeing that from the presentations from the CCOs as well, that they're rapidly getting their houses into order, and so are we. So thanks to Matthew and the team, and we hope for a bigger, brighter, more staff and a lot more climate action next year, and no more lockdowns as well. So thank you.
Kia ora. Councillor Walker, final comment.
Madam Chair, I just want to zero in on trees, which are dear to my heart and something that I'm well familiar with. And I have a huge concern at the loss of current trees. That includes trees within the streetscape, issues around the current maintenance of those trees, the death rate we're experiencing in droughts now, the unsuitability of trees being planted in many situations, the present difficulties being experienced because Vector and others are hacking at trees because of the change in the regulations around the power lines, the impact of underground services, and a variety of things that mean the existence of trees, of street trees in many situations, is precarious. The lack of adequate future-proofed guidelines, such as I've seen in other cities, for trees that are future-proofed for climate change and heat effects and new disease organisms that are currently at play. I could refer you to other cities that have done recent work around this. So the consequences that putting something up as a short-term response without the adequate lead-in time that's required around this is fraught with massive problems around delivery. The other issue related to this is the devastation that's being experienced on a daily basis. Witness the tree outside the church that Christine Fletcher has brought to our attention. So my plea is that we reconfigure what we're doing here. There are other places to plant trees rather than focusing quite so much on the streetscape without the preliminary work. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker, for keeping that very succinct and to the point, and acknowledge your work on reducing emissions. So that brings us to the end of the debate on this item. I would like to move the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 To the contrary? Kua mana. Carried. Thank you. So